Good morning, Keith Tebow from FRCmedia. Thank you for joining us today. We've spent a lot of time over the past week or so talking about how schools in Fall River are going to be handling opening this fall. We've had the opportunity to talk about the Fall River Public Schools. Last week, we spoke with representatives from Diamond Regional and Bishop Connolly High School. Today, we want to talk about how the local Catholic schools will be handling the opening coming up just like next week in some instances. I'm pleased to be joined by Daniel Roy. He is the Superintendent of Schools for the Diocese of Fall River. Mr. Roy, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thank you, Keith. I'm well. It's a pleasure to be here.
We spoke last week with Kathleen St. Laurent, the principal of Bishop Connolly High School. It's going to be a hybrid model for Bishop Connolly. They're actually starting next week. Obviously you're the superintendent of Bishop Connolly and the other high schools. What's the plan for the other Catholic schools for the fall coming up in, I guess, as early as next week, right?
Yes. Well, the elementary schools here in the city of Fall River, the Catholic elementary schools here in the city of Fall River, will be starting on September 1st, and they will be starting in person, offering the option to families who so choose to remain remote, but that schools will be fully open and compliant with DESE and Department of Health regulations in opening, but moving toward in-person learning for our elementary schools here in Fall River.
Now, in terms of parents that may have opted out to be remote, do you have any sense? I mean, we're a week away, really, as we record this. Do you have a sense as to like a percentage of families that have decided to remain and keep their students learning remotely?
Keith, it's a small number in almost every case across the diocese. The school leaders at each school have been really diligent in maintaining communication over the course of the summer, being very clear about the plans and the capacities that the schools have for reopening, and collecting that information and having those conversations with families to really reassure them. And it is a small number.
Now, in terms of preparing for all this, obviously a lot of work has had to be done facility-wise in terms of the physical schools and making them and getting them ready and prepared for the opening of school next week. Talk a little bit about that. And I would think that in terms of the Catholic schools, the raw numbers of students are obviously smaller than some of the public schools in Fall River. So how did that play out in terms of ensuring that you'll be able to go, full in person for those families who wish to do so?
Sure. Yes. And our schools have been really proactive in making sure that they have the necessary PPE, the equipment, and that they have a clear understanding of the protocols, doing trainings with their faculty, making sure that students are arriving on September 1st or whenever the start date is in other cities across the diocese. That they are arriving and that they're well informed and well prepared. It has been a summer like no other for Catholic schools and schools everywhere that have worked hard to prepare and to provide that welcoming and safe, secure environment for students and their families on the return. And you're right to point out, Keith, that our numbers are smaller, but in fact, what that allows our teachers to do is to give really special attention to students, to educate the whole person, and to create that welcoming community that our Catholic schools are really known for.
How has the response been from, the teachers in the schools and parents specifically? I know that school departments, and I'm sure you as well, have been very open and transparent about the process, keeping everyone up to date. How has the response been from those two constituencies, the parents and the teachers within the schools?
Sure. I mean, they've asked a lot of really good questions that have been instructive to us in planning. And admittedly, like much of society right now, folks are nervous. And So I think what we can do is, we can be communicative, we can be open about what we're doing, and we can also assure folks that we are continuing to monitor the situation. We're continuing to look at transmission levels and other important statewide data. And if we do need to make a pivot to another type of plan, say a hybrid plan or even a remote plan, we're going to work closely with our schools to make the best decision.
Now, in terms of making a pivot, will that be done because of the Catholic schools' reach, right? The diocese reaches from, the Fall River area, I mean, all the way through Cape Cod. Is there a possibility that a pivot may happen more locally, more, in terms of isolated than in terms of system-wide based on the situation?
Yes, that's right. So our schools are located in 11 cities and towns in Southeast Massachusetts. So, what's happening in Barnstable, in Hyannis, may be very different from what's happening in Attleboro. And so, yes, we do have, we are giving particular attention to each of those areas. We're following the state maps and the guidance, and we're maintaining contact with our school leaders. We just met with them yesterday on Zoom, to talk about the guidelines, to review some things, to answer questions, to make sure that everyone is prepared for the start of school.
I want to go back for a few moments, back to March. In some ways, it seemed like it was so long ago, but in other, ways, it just was yesterday.
Yeah.
When the pandemic hit and schools were forced to close and learn remotely, how did the Catholic schools, the elementary schools, the high schools, how did you handle that transition, and what did it mean for your students back in March?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we found, Keith, is that our schools were able to make the pivot quickly. I think that stems from our educators and school leaders and all of our stakeholders' commitment to mission, to staying engaged, to taking a personal approach, obviously within the limitations that a remote situation would allow. But our schools worked very hard at the outset because they're so committed to students and their families, to make sure that the school was staying engaged, to maintain a continuity of learning through those very difficult weeks. But I think that was something that our families appreciated, and I think it was noticed. I think it was noticed by others as well.
Now, in terms of throughout the entire process, obviously you're in communication with the state, the Department of Health, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. How also closely are you in tune with the local communities you serve? I did ask Principal St. Laurent last week about this in terms of her conversations with Fall River. Obviously, you have a lot of jurisdictions. You said 11 cities and towns
Yes.
that the schools are in. How important and how communicative has it been between your office and the communities that you serve in terms of keeping lines of communication open and making sure that there are there's information sharing on both sides, if you will?
Yes, that's a good question. We have encouraged our school leaders from the outset to develop, if they haven't yet, and to maintain working relationships with the cities and towns in which they're located. If questions do arise and there's a need for support, then the central office here does get involved. But our school leaders have shown again a ton of initiative, really driven by their commitment to the mission of Catholic education, to make sure that the boxes are checked, to make sure that things are ready, to make sure that individuals' concerns both in the school and outside the school are addressed, and really guiding their schools into the start of this school year. So, and of course, what that involves is a partnership with the town and the local Board of Health.
Daniel Roy, the Superintendent of Schools for the Catholic Schools in the Diocese of Fall River. Thank you for the information and sharing it with us, and all the best as school opens next week. I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure, Keith. Thank you.
And we want to thank you for joining us today here on FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Enjoy the rest of your day.